Previously on Solo Leveling, Jinwoo used the Cup of Reincarnation to reshape reality. With the monarchs and magic beasts behind him, he began a new life, quietly retracing the paths of his past and reconnecting with the people he once held dear in this altered timeline. Time flowed freely in this new world, and 12 years slipped by in the blink of an eye. On the outskirts of Seoul, a police station welcomed a new addition to the Violent Crimes Unit, an officer named Lee Se-hwan. It was his first day, and the weight of a lingering rumor gnawed at his nerves. Stories spoke of a detective known only as the Phantom, a man who cracked every case he touched, even those abandoned as unsolvable. The mention of working under the same unit as this enigmatic figure stirred both excitement and anxiety in Se-hwan. As he stood there, collecting his thoughts, an officer approached, offering a cup of coffee and a word of luck for his first day. Se-hwan accepted it gratefully, his curiosity piqued as he asked about the captain he would be working under. With a mix of amusement and seriousness, the officer revealed that the man he was referring to was none other than the Phantom himself, and that Se-hwan would soon be meeting him. Before Se-hwan could fully process the revelation, a tall man appeared in the hallway, taking in the sight of the new recruit before placing a firm hand on his shoulder and stating that his training was already underway. This man was Detective Sung Jinwoo, now known in the force simply as the Phantom. With an unexpectedly warm demeanor, Jinwoo guided Se-hwan out of the office, casually drilling into him the core principles of criminal pursuit. Over the next few days, Se-hwan chased minor cases under Jinwoo's guidance, soon realizing that the Phantom's pace was relentless. Fatigue etched itself into the rookie's features, each step beside Jinwoo, testing the limits of his endurance. Yet Jinwoo found purpose in mentoring someone with such promise. He saw potential, and that made the effort worthwhile. However, their routine was soon interrupted when a more serious case landed on their desks. A distressed woman walked into the station, seeking help for her friend who had recently died in what had been ruled a suicide. Her voice quivered as she insisted that her friend, Jin Yi, would never do something like that to herself. The detective initially assigned to the case had already dismissed her concerns, chalking them up to grief and emotional denial. As tensions rose, Jinwoo stepped in, calmly requesting to see the case file. His sharp eyes scanned the report. Jin Yi had been found in her bathtub, a fatal wound on her wrist, the only fingerprints on the knife her own. Medical records indicated a history of depression, though friends described her as cheerful and full of life. Everything appeared conclusive, yet a lingering instinct pulled at Jinwoo. He decided to take over the investigation, motioning for the grieving friend to accompany him to his office for a more private talk. Not long after, in the shadowed quiet of a dimly lit residence, Jinwoo emerged from the abyss, darkness curling around him. The spacious condominium stood silent, a hollow shell of someone who once lived alone. Despite the deep of night, Jinwoo moved with practiced ease until he reached the bathroom, the site of the tragedy. His gaze swept over the bathtub, the bloodstains telling a story of pain. And then, with quiet authority, he whispered a single word, "Arise." The blood rippled, then surged. From it emerged a shadowed figure, the broken soul of Jin Yi. She stirred weakly, her awareness flickering like a fading candle. Jinwoo steadied her, offering calm reassurance before gently asking if she truly could have hurt herself like that. In silence burdened with sorrow, Jin Yi confessed the truth and recounted her final moments. That night, as the city drifted into dusk, a knock echoed on the door of a middle-aged man's home. Standing at the threshold was Jinwoo, his detective badge raised. The man, who happened to be Jin Yi's father, opened the door with urgency and asked if the police had discovered anything new. Jinwoo nodded with practiced calm, stating that the investigation remained ongoing and requested to ask him a few questions. The man agreed without hesitation, and the two soon found themselves in a nearby cafe, seated across from one another. Jinwoo began his inquiry, asking about Jin Yi's school life and whether she had shown signs of aggression. The man faltered at first, but soon regained composure, describing Jin Yi as gentle and innocent, incapable of cruelty or resentment. His voice cracked with emotion, hands trembling as he spoke of the love he bore for his daughter, even admitting that she wasn't his by blood. Grief lined every word, thick with regret over failing to see her pain sooner. Jinwoo listened, his gaze unwavering. Then, reaching into his coat, he placed a phone on the table. Calmly, he explained that he had found a recording during his investigation, one left behind by Jin Yi. Moments later, her trembling voice filled the cafe, recounting the years of abuse she had suffered at the hands of her adoptive father. Her words painted a chilling picture: the torment, the fear, the desperate attempts to flee, only to be hounded even from afar. It was the final push that had broken her. As the recording ended, the man's demeanor shifted. Grief twisted into defiance, and with a hardened glare, he demanded to know what Jinwoo intended to do now instead of arresting him on the spot. Jinwoo didn't answer. The cafe around them began to blur, colors draining, shadows creeping. The man blinked in confusion as the walls dissolved into an abyss. The only things left were the chairs, the table, and Jinwoo, his presence now impossibly vast. Panic set in. The man tried to flee, but the moment he moved, countless insect-like limbs rose from the void, snaring him with terrifying precision. Screams tore from his throat as the claws shredded his body, dragging him into the abyss with feral wrath. Blood splattered across the darkness, and then all fell silent. Jinwoo remained seated, unmoved. From beside him, Jin Yi's figure emerged from the shadows. She bowed in quiet gratitude, her voice soft as she thanked the Shadow Monarch for delivering justice. Jinwoo returned her gaze gently, allowing her a moment to speak. After a pause, she made a humble request. The next morning, Jin Yi's closest friend arrived at the precinct, summoned for an update. Jinwoo welcomed her in, briefly explained the case's closure, then handed her a small package, cheerfully wrapped. It was a gift, one Jin Yi had bought before her death. Tears filled the woman's eyes as she unwrapped the present, a simple mug paired with a birthday letter in Jin Yi's handwriting. In that moment, Jinwoo's thoughts drifted to what could have been. Had Jin Yi never received those vile messages from her adoptive father, the two best friends might have been celebrating together today. Later that evening, Jinwoo found himself seated at a familiar pork belly restaurant. The air was filled with the comforting scent of grilled meat, and across from him sat Jinho, nervously announcing his plan to propose to Jinna. With a blend of pride and worry, he revealed a ring box, asking Jinwoo if he had made the right choice. Jinwoo sighed, admitting that he wasn't the best when it came to matters of the heart. But Jinho wasn't dissuaded. Grinning, he shared his grand plan. Once Jinna completed her medical degree, he would build her a hospital on land worth 30 billion won. The gesture touched Jinwoo, but he reminded Jinho that material gifts wouldn't win Jinna's heart. What mattered most was being genuine. Jinho's character alone was more than enough to be a worthy partner for his sister. Jinho, moved by his words, asked for a hug with teary eyes. Jinwoo tried to dodge the embrace, but Jinho's emotional persistence won out. That night, Jinwoo returned home to his spacious residence on Seoul's outskirts. Inside, Hyein greeted him with a smile, gently rocking their son, Suho, in her arms. Jinwoo's expression softened as he took the child, who giggled with joy and wrapped his tiny arms around his father's neck. Noticing the tension between two of his loyal shadows, Jinwoo tilted his chin toward Bellion and Igris, silently questioning their dispute. Hyein, trying not to laugh, explained how the two had been locked in a heated debate over Suho's upbringing. Bellion insisted it was time for sword training, while Igris argued for focusing on academics in this modern age. Jinwoo cut in, reminding them that their son had yet to even walk, and Hai-In, clearly exasperated, gently nudged him, suggesting that he should spend more time at home, at least until Suho took his first steps. With a sheepish smile, Jinwoo nodded, agreeing without protest. The next morning, Jinwoo made his way straight to Chief Woo Jinchul's desk. The chief had summoned him urgently, and his expression was grave. A peculiar development had occurred. The legal guardian of the woman who recently died had vanished without a trace. Even more strangely, all surveillance cameras near his residence had stopped functioning at the exact same time. Feigning surprise, Jinwoo said nothing. Jinchul, trusting in his discretion, brushed the matter aside and revealed the true reason for their meeting. He slid a small note across the table containing the name and room number of a hospital. Chairman Go Gun-hee was in critical condition. The chief's voice was somber as he urged Jinwoo to visit, sensing this might be the final opportunity. Later that day, Jinwoo entered the hospital room where the once mighty chairman lay frail and surrounded by machinery. Go Gun-hee's eyes lit up as he saw Jinwoo. With a faint nod, he gestured for the oxygen mask to be removed. Jinwoo complied, listening as the chairman spoke in broken whispers. He had searched for Jinwoo ever since the day he vanished after giving him the magical potion all those years ago. Jinwoo reached into his coat, producing another bottle of the elixir of life, but Go Gun-hee shook his head. He had lived enough. He was ready. There was just one thing he wished for, not a longer life, but a glimpse into the one he had forgotten. The one Jinwoo had once mentioned, a world where he had fought as a warrior beside him. Jinwoo hesitated. He knew the pain such memories could bring, but the chairman's gaze was firm, unafraid. So Jinwoo took his hand and unlocked the memories long buried. A flood of visions swept over Go Gun-hee, battles, sacrifice, unity. He relived it all. Tears streamed down his face, but his heart was full. In those final moments, he was no longer a frail man in a hospital bed. He was a hero once more. His final breath escaped in peace. The beeping of the monitor faded into a long, solemn tone. Jinwoo wiped the tears from the chairman's face and stood in silence, honoring a true warrior. As Jinwoo left the hospital, the colors of autumn embraced him. The world moved on. But then his phone rang, jolting him from his thoughts. It was Hai-In, her voice frantic and disbelieving. Through the chaos, she somehow managed to say the words. Suho was flying around the house. A flicker of amusement warmed Jinwoo's expression as he promised he'd be home soon to take care of it. He told her not to worry. He'd personally teach their son how to fly. Back home, the chaos continued. Bellion declared Suho's airborne abilities assigned to begin aerial combat training. Igris, ever the rational one, insisted this hinted at a future in aviation. Meanwhile, Hai-In tried to clean the shattered utensils caused by her son's airborne antics, shouting in exasperation for Jinwoo to hurry home. By the time Suho learned to walk, he was freely roaming around the house. And for some unknown reason, he had developed a strange attachment to the Ant King. Beru, who was born to instill fear in humans, was visibly shaken. Since his fateful clash with Jinwoo on Jeju Island, this was the second time he had encountered an emotion other than terror directed at him. Beru found himself in a perplexing dilemma and tried everything to avoid the young monarch, but no matter where he went, no matter how high he flew, Suho followed with the same unwavering interest and innocent fascination. The sight of Suho's steady, curious gaze left Beru more bewildered than he'd care to admit. He couldn't understand why the young monarch sought him so persistently. Hoping for answers, Beru turned to Igris. The ever-composed Shadow Knight offered a simple yet profound insight. He pointed out that to a toddler, a towering ant who could walk, fly, and even speak must appear nothing short of a living marvel. Beru pondered that revelation in silence. And in the curious, unflinching eyes of the young master, he found something he had never expected, something he perhaps always needed: acceptance. Years passed, and Suho had now grown old enough for kindergarten. One ordinary day, Hye-in stepped into his school, greeted warmly by the director. With a pleasant smile, the woman handed her a sketchbook filled with Suho's drawings. On the very first page was the image of a two-legged ant. The director explained that the children had been asked to draw a friend, and this had been Suho's answer. As Hye-in studied the drawing, realization slowly dawned. It was unmistakably Baru. The director encouraged her to turn the pages, revealing more sketches Suho had made. On the next page were depictions of other shadow soldiers playing alongside him. As she flipped through, page after page followed the same theme: shadowy figures, monsters, warriors, all drawn with the warmth and familiarity of cherished companions. Then, the director's voice broke Hye-in's thoughts, guiding her attention to the final page. The theme for that one had been home, and this, she explained, was the reason she'd requested the meeting. It looked like a small, ordinary house at first glance, but beneath it, the ground was shaded pitch black, cloaked in shadows. When asked about it, Suho had said that was where his friends, his family, and his big dad lived. Initially, the director had found the imagery unsettling, even wondering if something might be wrong at home. But Suho's cheerfulness, his balanced behavior, and the lack of any signs of trouble had led her to another conclusion. Perhaps he simply had a unique way of seeing the world. She even suggested that Suho might have a rare, artistic gift. Hye-in managed a polite smile and an awkward agreement before bidding the director farewell, but her thoughts were troubled as she returned home to speak with Jinwoo. When Jinwoo flipped through the sketchbook, he couldn't help but chuckle. There was a playful pride in his gaze as he admired his son's imagination, but when Hye-in directed him to the last page, asking if he knew anything about the big dad living inside the shadows, Jinwoo paused. His lips curled into a quiet laugh as faint memories stirred. Memories of a throne, of darkness, of a world where he had once ruled as the shadow monarch. But Hye-in wasn't amused. Her expression had grown serious as she conveyed another concern raised by the kindergarten staff. The director had noted how other children, despite Suho's calm demeanor, instinctively kept their distance from him. That piece of information struck a chord within Jinwoo. He had suspected it for a while. It wasn't mere coincidence. In Suho, the children must have sensed something far deeper, something primal, a trace of the overwhelming aura once carried by the Shadow Monarch, an instinctive fear of death. The power that Jinwoo had borne for so long was now awakening in his son, growing stronger by the day, and Jinwoo knew what that meant. Suho wouldn't be able to live a normal life among humans unless he could completely suppress or control that power. Until then, there was only one path forward. Jinwoo's eyes drifted to the wall of the living room. At the center hung the largest frame, their wedding day, frozen in time, a moment of joy. Surrounding it were countless pictures of Suho, but these weren't ordinary family photos. They were glimpses into a childhood surrounded by shadows, warriors, and beings of incredible might. Then, with resolve hardening in his chest, Jinwoo made the difficult decision to seal Suho's powers, along with his memories of the shadow soldiers, until the time was right. From the darkness behind him, Baru emerged quietly. The Ant Marshal had been listening and understood. Jinwoo gently handed him the drawing Suho had made, one last look at the memory of a bond now being put to rest. Baru's gaze softened as he took in the child's innocent depiction. His eyes shimmered with unshed tears as he requested a final moment alone with the young master. He stepped carefully into Suho's room. The boy slept peacefully, the rise and fall of his breath like a lullaby. Baru stood over him, silent and still. Then, softly, he whispered his farewell, not just for himself, but on behalf of all shadow soldiers who had once cherished the presence of the young prince. With that, Jinwoo approached his son. He placed a hand on the boy's forehead, his heart heavy, and cast the spell that sealed away the powers and memories that bound Suho to the shadows, granting him a chance at a normal life. And as the door clicked shut behind him, Suho drifted deeper into sleep, where dreams carried him through shadowy meadows filled with dancing ants, knights, and orcs. A final joyful memory of a world he would one day return to. The sun shone brightly over Seoul on yet another morning, marking a quiet yet significant milestone, Suho's transition into adulthood. It was his first day at high school, a place that perfectly embodied the law of the jungle, where the strong ruled and the weak endured. Lee Yun-cheol, also a freshman, found himself seated at the back of the classroom. A new environment meant new challenges, and Yun-cheol was more than ready to assert his dominance. As he observed the classroom dynamics, his gaze fell on Suho. Seated quietly, Suho exuded a strange detachment from the bustling energy of the room. His casual glance toward Yun-cheol held a subtle indifference, one so calm it bordered on provocation. That look alone stirred something in Yun-cheol, igniting a need to reassert his presence. As he rose to confront the peculiar student, a firm grip on his shoulder brought him to a halt. Startled, he turned to see Jo Sung-ho, a fellow student who had apparently known Suho from middle school. Sung-ho warned him then and there Suho wasn't someone to mess with, but his caution only served to deepen Yun-cheol's irritation. Dragging Sung-ho out to the school grounds, Yun-cheol unleashed a brutal beating to silence the warning. He needed to send a message to establish himself. Yet, even under blows and bruises, Sung-ho remained unwavering in his stance. He spoke again of Suho's reputation, of strength no one dared challenge back in junior high. Yun-cheol scoffed at the idea. His disbelief twisted into frustration, culminating in a stinging slap that echoed across the open air. And just then, a presence approached from the distance. Suho was walking steadily toward them, his expression unreadable. At the sight, Sung-ho instinctively lowered his head, refusing to meet his eyes. Yun-cheol, still caught in a whirlwind of confusion and simmering anger, had no time to react. In a blur of motion, Suho launched a flying kick that crashed into one of his underlings, sending the boy sprawling to the ground with a sickening thud. Before the second could respond, another flying kick landed cleanly against his face, knocking him out cold. Stunned, Yun-cheol stood frozen, struggling to process the sudden onslaught. But as rage overtook his senses, he threw a punch at Suho, only for it to be stopped mid-air by an impossibly fast kick that intercepted the blow with inhuman precision. Then came the final strike, a devastating kick under his chin that lifted him off his feet before slamming him into the ground. Silence followed, heavy and suffocating, as all three of Yun-cheol's group lay unconscious. With the matter settled, Suho turned and headed back toward the classroom to pick up his bag. But inside, the room's stillness felt different, too quiet, almost unnerving. A faint sense of nostalgia washed over him, as if he'd been waiting for something beyond the ordinary. Just as he reached for the door, something strange stopped him. It wouldn't budge. At first, he thought it was locked, but even as he applied more force, the door refused to move. Confusion flashed in his eyes. Rushing to the window, he peered outside, and what he saw defied reality. The world had frozen in time. Students stood mid-stride, cars halted motionless on the road, and even a ball remained suspended mid-bounce. Everything was locked in eerie stillness. Then it began. A black hole emerged at the back of the classroom, its swirling darkness distorting the very air around it. It stood there ominously, as if reality itself had been torn open to reveal a gateway to the unknown. Suho's pulse quickened, not from fear, but from something else. Deep down, it felt like the moment he'd been waiting for. His mother had always said he resembled his father, And now, he found himself wondering what his father would do in a moment like this. The answer soon became clear. With his heart pounding like a war drum, Suho stepped forward, his feet moving with instinctive certainty as he walked into the blackness. The darkness swallowed him whole. He emerged in a dim hallway, its walls ancient and worn, the air thick with silence. Glancing behind him, he saw the passage had vanished, leaving him no path but forward. Reaching out, he took a torch from the wall, lifting it high to illuminate the path ahead. Shadows stretched and flickered with the flames, revealing rows of neatly arranged weapons: swords, daggers, bows, spears, maces. The corridor displayed an arsenal of gleaming armaments, each catching the torchlight with deadly promise. Suho's heart thudded faster as he walked past them. Notifications began flashing before his eyes, describing use cases and eligibility ranks. Each weapon seemed to call out to him in its own unique way. Suho froze for a moment, half convinced he was inside a game. A thrill rushed through him as he realized he had to choose one of the weapons. As he moved deeper into the hallway, his eyes briefly landed on a dagger, the same type once used by Jinwoo. It looked fragile, unimpressive. Suho wondered who in their right mind would ever rely on something so weak. Brushing past it, his gaze locked onto something else entirely: a set of gauntlets. They stood out from the rest, their polished surface gleaming with a raw, untamed energy. They radiated strength, something primal, something fitting. With his choice made, Suho tossed the torch aside and stepped forward. As his fingers touched the cold metal, he slid his hands into the gauntlets, the armor fitting as if forged for him alone. In that moment, the decision was made. Whatever lay ahead, this was the weapon he would face it with. Flames roared down the walls as Suho stepped forward cautiously. The corridor was drenched in a stillness that felt unnatural, but he paid it no mind. Each step echoed with tension. Then, just as he passed one of the suits of armor, it moved. The ancient steel groaned to life, lifting its sword high and aiming for Suho's head. The blade came down with a savage swing, but Suho reacted just in time, his gauntlets rising to intercept the strike with a harsh clang. Without hesitation, he retaliated, his fist crashing into the armor with all his strength. The blow rang through the hallway, metal bending under the sheer force until the armored knight collapsed to the ground. Panting, Suho staggered back. His eyes darted around and realization struck. There were many more suits along the path he'd walked. His worst fear materialized before his eyes, as one by one they began to move, their weapons gleaming ominously in the firelight. The corridor erupted into chaos as Suho braced himself for the onslaught. His fists became a blur. The enchanted gauntlets smashed through helmets and body armor with ruthless precision. Each clash echoed like a drumbeat of war. With a crushing kick, he pinned the last knight to the floor, ending the battle in a violent crescendo. Silence returned. Then, a glowing message appeared before his eyes. He had reached level 19 after defeating the horde of living armor. A smirk of satisfaction tugged at his lips, though a flicker of confusion clouded his thoughts. How had he managed to survive before the level up? The system felt more and more like a game now, guiding him, rewarding him with strength after each challenge. Pushing the thoughts aside, he turned his focus to the hallway. At its end loomed a massive door, the only way forward. With determination, he placed both hands on the heavy wood and pushed. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a grand lair beyond. Wall-mounted torches flared to life, illuminating the room as Suho stepped inside. At the far end stood a throne, and upon it, Marshal Igris. A dark aura pulsed from his body, and his red plume flickered in the air. Without a word, Igris rose and drew his demon monarch sword, holding it before Suho with terrifying menace. Nervousness flickered across Suho's face. He knew instantly this was no ordinary opponent. If he wanted to survive, he had to strike first. But before he could even finish the thought, Igris moved. The Black Knight's speed was unreal. One instant he sat on the throne. The next, his glowing blade sliced through the air, passing Suho in a blur of deadly precision. Suho gasped and bolted upright. The lair was gone. So was the knight. He was back at the starting point. His heart still thundered from the shock. The memory of the glowing sword and the sheer force behind it made him shiver. He had been sure it was the end, but he was alive. Then, he noticed something strange: the torches. When he began, there were 3, each burning with blue flames. Now, one had gone out. He stared at it, realization dawning. These flames weren't for show. They represented his chances, his lives. Every time he failed, a torch extinguished. Suho's breathing calmed as understanding replaced fear. He quickly swapped out his old gauntlets for a new upgraded pair. He needed every edge he could get before the flames died out completely. But just as he braced himself again, it happened. Time twisted, he was thrown back to the beginning once more. Only one torch remained now, flickering faintly against the gloom. Suho groaned in frustration, rolling on the ground, fury boiling in his chest. The Black Knight was too powerful. The gap between them felt like a mountain, unscalable, impossible. It wasn't just difficult, it was unfair. The trial stacked every odd against him, but even in frustration, he refused to quit. Gritting his teeth, Suho rose again, determination burning in his eyes. He equipped himself with every weapon within reach, driven by a single resolve to grow stronger. This time, he would level up further before daring to face the knight again. As he stepped forward, he saw them once more, suits of armor standing silently in their previous places as if nothing had happened. They had respawned. Suho sighed, took a breath, then launched himself into the fray. His movements were sharp, precise, each strike cutting through the air with purpose. Suited enemies fell swiftly, his weapons sinking deep into their helmets. One archer raised a bow, arrow poised to fire, but Suho was faster. In a flash, he closed the gap and slammed a punch into the enemy, sending it flying. Soon, the corridor was filled with fallen armor. Notifications flickered before his eyes. He had leveled up again. Another message appeared. He had reached the required level to initiate an advancement quest. Without hesitation, Suho accepted. 2 portals burst open beside him, releasing fresh waves of armored beasts. A timer ticked down. The quest had begun. Suho's grin widened. The challenge thrilled him. Then came the mages, hands glowing with arcane energy. Flames burst from their fingertips, conjuring a storm of fire. Suho moved instinctively, jumping back to avoid the brunt of the blast. But they weren't done. Together, they summoned a massive fire spell and hurled it down toward him. Suho raised his shield just in time, the searing magic crashing against it as he stood firm, eyes never leaving his opponents. Then, the ground trembled. The mages had summoned a massive stone golem. Suho let out a sigh, tossed his shield aside, and surged forward. His fists became a flurry of strikes. In moments, the golem crumbled under his relentless assault. Driven by battle lust and unyielding will, Suho tore through the remaining enemies. Every strike was perfect, every move calculated. Armored beasts and mages alike fell before him, reduced to dust and silence. With the battlefield cleared, a flood of notifications appeared. He had advanced from fighter class to soul striker. His rewards were generous: a guard's necklace, the highest grade mage's ring, and the scorching gauntlets of the fighting phantom. Suho didn't waste a second. He returned to the Black Knight's lair. Igris still sat on the throne, unflinching. But Suho had changed. He had reached level 70. Power surged through him, more than ever before. With a gaze full of conviction, he challenged the Black Knight again. Igris rose, drew his sword, and struck. The blade, now crackling with dark energy, smashed the ground, and sent a shockwave that stunned Suho. But he dodged at the last moment, repositioned himself above the knight, and struck back with precision and force. The lair shook. Dust and debris clouded the air. But the fight wasn't over. Suho's agility shone. He dodged every blow, each movement honed from dozens of battles. His counterattacks came fast and relentless, but deep down, he knew. It still wasn't enough. Igris didn't budge. The knight swung his blade with brutal force, sending Suho flying, yet Suho used the momentum to his advantage. Mid-air, he twisted and came down hard, gauntleted fists slamming into Igris with overwhelming strength. The knight faltered for the first time. Suho, however, didn't let up. Punch after punch followed, culminating in a devastating strike to the chest that launched Igris into a pillar, cracking it with violent force. Igris blocked what he could, but Suho's blows were too many, too fast. Piece by piece, the knight's defenses fell apart. Yet, there was no bitterness in Igris's gaze, only admiration. In Suho's strength, he saw the shadow of his king. Born to a godlike father and an S-rank awakened mother, Suho's potential was boundless. He hadn't even reached his peak, and still, he stood above monsters. Igris knew the battle had reached its end. Undaunted, Suho drew in his mana for one final strike. Then, with a roar, he unleashed it, piercing through sword and steel alike, reducing the Black Knight to dust. At last, Suho stood victorious, releasing a long-held shout as a wave of relief and triumph surged through him. But his journey wasn't over. Behind him, a new gate shimmered into existence. Relief flooded him at the thought. Perhaps this was the exit. Without hesitation, he sprinted toward the gate, propelled by hope and rising anticipation. But on the other side, his breath caught. He found himself surrounded by an area consumed in flames. Unbeknownst to him, Suho had stepped into the demon castle. The monsters here charged at him without hesitation, but Suho, now more powerful than ever, destroyed them with ease. Floor after floor, beast after beast, none could challenge him. Even floor bosses like Vulcan and Midas fell swiftly, without resistance. Suho couldn't help but wonder, was he that strong now, or were they simply too weak? Regardless, his level soared, and soon he stood at the gates of the 100th floor. But instead of battle, he was greeted by something unexpected, a demon lady flanked by guards. She introduced herself as Ezel, eldest daughter of the Radiru clan, and congratulated him for reaching the final stage. Suho blinked, surprised. He looked around, cautious, but Ezel only chuckled, assuring him he had truly cleared the castle and invited him to a banquet hosted by her father. Suho politely declined, saying he wasn't of age to drink yet. Then, with a light-hearted smile, he waved goodbye. Ezel returned the gesture, sending him off to his next mission as he stepped through a new gate. Upon reaching the other end, Suho was met with a daunting sight. A colony of ants, their bodies as large as humans, screeching in unison as they prepared to strike. Suho, still trying to process the scene before him, immediately ran for his life, his breath ragged as panic set in. But amidst the chaos, a small silver lining appeared. Each victory against the ants made him stronger. His level was rising steadily with every battle, fueling him with renewed determination. After what felt like an eternity of relentless attacks, the charge of ants finally ceased, and Suho steeled himself for the next challenge ahead. Soon, he found himself standing before the last room of the cavern. It was a massive, hollow chamber that exuded an ominous presence. The sheer size of the lair unnerved him, sending a chill down his spine, but he forced himself to press forward. At the far end of the chamber stood the humanoid ant king, Beru. As their eyes locked, Suho noticed something strange about the creature. For reasons he couldn't explain, Beru seemed to be crying. But before Suho could fully process what he saw, the ant king surged forward, claws extended, and unleashed an ear-splitting cry that shook the very foundation of the lair. Beru's movements were impossibly fast, each strike landing with devastating precision. Suho braced himself, standing firm and taking every blow head-on. Yet, amid the fury of the attack, Suho sensed something off. Despite Beru's overwhelming strength, the creature seemed to hesitate at critical moments, pulling back when it could have delivered fatal blows. That hesitation, though subtle, became Suho's lifeline. He seized each fleeting opportunity, landing a lethal jab to Beru's face, which seemed to crumble under the weight of an emotional meltdown at the sight of his grown young monarch. The battle raged on until Beru finally admitted defeat, dissolving into thin air. Suho, battered and drained, let out a long sigh of relief, a wave of luck washing over him as he stood tall. Though victorious, he couldn't help but laugh, grateful for the stroke of fortune that had spared him a much easier boss this time, a stark contrast to the last. His body aching from relentless combat, barely had a moment's respite when yet another gate materialized before him. A surge of anticipation swelled in his chest as he saw his level had finally hit 99. It felt almost poetic, the number so complete he believed he had reached his final threshold. With that belief warming his thoughts, Suho stepped eagerly through the gate, convinced his long adventure had finally reached its conclusion. But the sight that greeted him shattered that hope. Yet another endless horde of beasts stretched across the horizon, and this time it was giants and dragons that loomed in the distance. Relief turned to dread in an instant. His journey wasn't over, not even close. It was just one trial after another, and once again, without hesitation, Suho plunged into the fray. His body moved on instinct, dodging blows, countering with precise and lethal strikes. Each monster that lunged toward him fell beneath his fist. One of the giants swung a colossal sword, aiming to crush him, but Suho shattered the blade with a single blow and followed up with a devastating kick that sent the creature's chin reeling. He landed gracefully, his breath shallow, but before he could even recover, another wave surged forth. A monstrous unit, led by high orcs and ice bears, lunged toward him with ferocious cries. Suho met them head-on. His fists tore through the beasts, his blows thunderous, decisive, unrelenting. High orcs crumbled under his strikes, while the bears thudded to the ground in rapid succession. But there was no pause. More orcs rained down from above, attempting a surprise descent. Suho's reflexes sparked, and he leapt backward just in time, narrowly evading their blades. The pressure didn't relent. High orcs now circled from every angle, mounted on wyverns as they soared overhead. Their plan was clear: exploit Suho's preference for ground combat, but he didn't flinch. Rising to the sky like a bolt of lightning, he tore through the airborne monsters, cleaving a path through the clouds and striking them down mid-flight. As he reached the zenith, a new terror emerged. Titans, stone giants whose towering forms stretched into the heavens, began to stir. At their center stood their leader, cloaked in shadow, who acknowledged Suho's arrival and his progress through the game. He spoke of the path ahead, warning that the title of young monarch would not make it easier from here. Suho didn't care for words. Even before the sentence finished, his fist rocketed forward with a brutal jab, followed by a storm of attacks that tore through the Titan army. Their stone bodies shattered, crashing into the earth below like broken statues. The battlefield stilled, but only for a moment. From the smoke emerged another presence, Tusk, the mighty shaman, his staff pulsing with destructive power. With a flick of his wrist, he activated gravitational magic, slamming Suho into the ground. Then, with cold precision, Tusk hurled him across the battlefield, burying him in the earth. 3 colossal dragons rose next, mouths glowing with fire as they loomed overhead. Without warning, they unleashed a barrage of flames, scorching the terrain. But Suho burst from the rubble just in time, his fists now armored with mana and with a blur of motion, he launched into the sky. One strike, then another, and the dragons fell one by one, their bodies crashing in a fiery cascade. Still, he knew his greatest threat remained. Tusk was still standing. Without wasting a moment, Suho mounted a fallen wyvern and took to the air, preparing his attack. But Tusk had already summoned a massive fireball above his head, casting it down before Suho could react. He dodged by a hair's breadth as the mountain behind him exploded into flame and rubble. Stunned by the destructive force, Suho's eyes widened, watching the blazing remnants of the peak crumble. Tusk, meanwhile, casually patted himself on the back, pleased with his newfound power. Before Suho could launch another strike, the battlefield descended into chaos again. Every shadow soldier he had defeated moments ago regenerated, this time joined by a familiar face, Jima, the Naga boss, charging forward with his trident in hand. But Suho was ready. In the blink of an eye, Suho slipped past the sweeping trident, his body moving with surgical precision before he retaliated with a devastating burst of strength that sent Jima hurtling across the field. It had been so long since this journey began, and Suho could feel his energy fading. He knew that if the monsters kept coming, he wouldn't last. His stamina was nearing its limit. Recognizing his vulnerability, he focused all his remaining mana into a single, devastating attack. A Gatling gun of punches that tore through the battlefield, annihilating everything in sight. Tusk tried to shield himself, but Suho had already moved. In a flash, he reappeared behind the shaman and with one final, crushing blow, dismantled him completely. The once feared opponent was reduced to nothing more than dust scattered across the field. As the dust settled, Suho approached a glowing gate ahead, his path forward. He paused, reflecting on everything. Though his level hadn't increased, he had gained something greater, the ability to control his immense strength with precision. Every encounter had refined him, turned his raw power into something purposeful. But before he could step forward, a figure approached from the sky. Suho looked up to see another Black Knight descending, but this one was different, radiating a presence so immense that even the winged ant, once his fiercest opponent, felt insignificant in comparison. Clenching his armored fists, Suho braced himself to face the towering knight. Bellion stepped forward, unsheathing a blade that hummed with restrained power. With a voice laced with pride and recognition, he called Suho the young monarch, then vanished in a flash of speed, striking first with blinding precision. Suho's fist met Bellion's blade in a thunderous clash. The ground shook beneath their feet as steel collided with force. Questions spun through Suho's mind. Why did each of these powerful foes recognize him as the young monarch? His punches grew faster, fiercer, each one driven by a hunger for answers. He landed a left hook that reverberated through Bellion's armor, but the knight remained unmoved. Suho followed with a right, but Bellion had vanished, reappearing behind him. A sharp sting grazed Suho's side as he turned to see the knight's blade now transformed into a massive segmented whip, flying in all directions with deadly grace. The blade sliced through the air, unleashing a storm of destruction in its wake. Suho knew he couldn't afford a single mistake. His movements sharpened, honed to razor precision as he dodged each strike like his life depended on it. Then, in a daring move, Suho grabbed hold of the segmented blade, halting its storm. Seizing the brief moment, he launched forward, delivering a flying kick toward Bellion's face. But the knight reacted in a flash, bringing both arms up to shield himself just in time. Suho, however, was already on the move, using the opening to slip past the defense and land a punishing blow to Bellion's midsection. The knight was sent flying, crashing into the earth with a boom that split the ground. But Suho knew this wasn't the end. Bellion would not fall so easily. This battle could last a day or longer if neither of them yielded. Still, amidst the clash, Suho felt it. This wasn't the real threat. Something greater loomed above. Lifting his gaze, he saw a massive wyvern soaring overhead, its screech splitting the air. A moment later, a figure dropped from the creature's back, landing hard enough to crack the very earth. Dust rose, obscuring the figure's face, but the presence was unmistakable. Cloaked in darkness, mana pouring from his form, the man stepped forward. Twin daggers gleamed at his sides. For the first time since entering the gate, Suho saw a human. He tried to speak, to reason, but the hooded figure gave no response. Without another word, Suho lunged forward, mana crackling around him. Their collision sent shockwaves through the air, but Suho found himself on the back foot. The hooded man moved with terrifying elegance, dodging every blow with ease. He wasn't just fast, he was masterful. Each movement betrayed years of experience. No matter how hard Suho fought, he couldn't keep up. Each attempt to strike only widened the gap between them. Falling to his knees, the weight of his failure pressed down on him, but he didn't surrender. Burning with defiance, Suho surged forward again. Though he knew his opponent's power far exceeded his own, he still believed, if only by sheer will, he could win. The hooded man stood unwavering, silently lifting his dagger high as Suho tightened his grip and charged forward with everything he had. Yet, his opponent didn't so much as flinch. With terrifying ease, the dagger carved through Suho's assault, shattering his gauntlets and leaving his hands bloodied and trembling. Pain surged through him, but his resolve held firm. Despite the searing wounds, Suho hurled himself forward once more, driven by sheer will to overcome this towering obstacle. A part of him couldn't help but marvel at the hooded figure's overwhelming strength and flawless technique. If he could become even a fraction that powerful, he thought, it would all be worth it. Suddenly, the man placed a hand on Suho's head. The touch was calm, final, as he asked if Suho enjoyed the game. A flicker of recognition struck Suho. He glimpsed the face beneath the hood, and everything clicked. The voice, the aura. This was someone he could never forget. It was his father. Shocked, breath stolen from his lungs, Suho offered no resistance as the man gently pushed him, sending him hurtling backward into the glowing gate. The man's parting words echoed. It was still too early for him. Light engulfed Suho, and he jolted awake with a gasp, upright in his chair. His vision cleared. The familiar classroom, drenched in warm sunset hues, brought reality rushing back. His heart raced as he wiped sweat from his brow. The dream still clung to him, vivid, unsettling, like a dungeon crawl from a game, but twisted into something personal. And at the end of it all stood his father. The idea made him shudder. Suho dismissed the bizarre imagery with a shake of his head, relieved it had only been a dream. As his breathing steadied, his classmates stepped into the room, surprised to find him still at school, and asked if everything was all right. He nodded, offering to help lock the doors and windows before they left for the day. Far above, on the school rooftop, Jinwoo stood with Beru and Igris, watching the quiet world below. Beru broke the silence, proposing something that had clearly weighed on him. Perhaps it was time to restore Suho's powers, given the young monarch's progress and relentless spirit. Igris agreed, noting that, in all of Suho's tests, this was the first time he had come so close to encountering their liege. But Jinwoo saw things differently. He reflected on his own journey, how strength alone had never been enough. The trials that shaped him had taught restraint, taught patience. He wanted Suho to learn the same. No matter how admirable his son's courage was, acting without strategy or self-awareness was a dangerous flaw. Suho needed time to grow, and Jinwoo was willing to give him just that. Beru, overwhelmed by emotion, gazed down at the sketch Suho had drawn of him, tears brimming in his eyes. Jinwoo, sensing Beru's feelings, gently reassured him. He suggested that it might be time to gather everyone together and simply share a meal. It had been too long since they enjoyed something so peaceful. In the bustling city, The air buzzed with the voice of a television broadcast detailing the live scenes of a raging forest fire near a residential zone where a firefighting unit had finally been mobilized to contain the spreading blaze. Among the responders stood Baek Yoon-ho, drawing in a deep breath of relief after enduring a long, exhausting night combating the wildfire. His body bore the weight of fatigue, yet his spirit remained firm as the team leader approached, handing him a chilled water bottle in quiet acknowledgement of their shared effort. At the forefront of the operation was Sung Il-hwan, Baek's captain, and a legendary figure in firefighting circles, renowned for his unshakable leadership and triumphs over seemingly impossible disasters. For Baek, serving under such a man was not just duty, but an honor he carried with silent pride. The moment was almost dreamlike, and as Baek lifted his gaze to the sky, he caught sight of something streaking across the clouds. But Il-hwan, calm and composed, dismissed it with a glance, noting it was likely just an airplane. Elsewhere, inside the glass-paneled heights of a sleek skyscraper, Jin-ho walked with brisk energy, his excitement thinly veiled behind the practiced composure of a professional. An employee kept pace beside him, going on about the importance of settling on the perfect title for their upcoming virtual reality game. But Jin-ho's attention was far from focused on titles or marketing plans. His thoughts danced with a joy that pulsed stronger than logic or work. As he stepped into the open space of his office, that joy became too overwhelming to hold back. Unable to contain it, he shared the news. His wife was pregnant. A wave of cheers swept through the room, and the atmosphere instantly shifted as the team erupted in applause, voices filled with congratulations. Yet, Jin-ho wasn't finished. As the celebration simmered, he delivered one more piece of news, perhaps even more unexpected. The team now had a backer, and not just any investor. Choi Jong-in, the most influential name in the entire industry, had decided to invest in their company, Ajin Soft. The room was stunned into silence for a heartbeat before it burst once again into celebration, this time tinged with awe. Jin-ho's name was no longer just circulating within the company walls. It had begun echoing across newspapers and media outlets, hailed as the next rising star of the industry. Meanwhile, the sun bathed the sky in a golden hue as Jinwoo and Haein soared above the world atop Kaisel. The wind surged past them, with each powerful beat of the wyvern's wings, lifting them ever higher into a vast, tranquil expanse where the horizon stretched in quiet eternity. A gentle warmth bloomed within Haein as she took in the breathtaking view, one she hadn't seen in years. Beside her, Jinwoo reached into his pocket and drew out a small box, revealing a gift he had prepared with care for their 16th wedding anniversary. Nestled within was a necklace of quiet elegance, its design timeless and beautiful. Without a word, Jinwoo reached over and clasped it around her neck. Their eyes met as they leaned closer, the moment suspended between wind and sky, ready to be sealed with a kiss. But just as their lips nearly met, Jinwoo's gaze drifted toward the horizon, his expression sharpening with quiet resolve. It was time for her to return. No words were needed. Haein saw it in his eyes and offered a lingering smile before stepping away, her fingers brushing his one last time. Kaisel shifted, wings slicing the air as the wyvern turned and began its descent, carrying her back toward Earth. Jinwoo watched until she was a fading speck against the golden light, before he finally turned. And in that instant, the calm shattered. The skies fractured like broken glass as a rift tore through the clouds, spilling blue fog that swirled and thickened into something unnatural. Jinwoo recognized it at once, the warning etched in memory, the one he could never ignore. Entities of unimaginable power had the potential to attract terrors from beyond dimensions, horrors drawn in, like moths to a burning flame. With his decision firm and his mind now quiet, he raised his hand. Shadows rippled beneath his feet, answering the call before it was spoken. Then came the command, timeless and absolute, as the darkness surged forth, Arise. At the same time, far away in a secluded realm, Suho stood once more within the depths of a foreboding lair. Exhaustion clung to him like a second skin, each breath heavier than the last, as he endured yet another crushing defeat. Days had passed since he last saw his home, and the eerie cold that permeated the air gnawed at him from within, threatening to hollow him out completely. But even after countless failures, Suho refused to bow. This was his final chance, and somewhere deep inside, a voice had haunted him ever since he first stepped foot into this place. Arise. The word echoed relentlessly through his soul, like a curse or a forgotten promise. With resolve tightening in his chest, he clenched his fists and turned to face the towering, ominous door before him. The path ahead lay cloaked in darkness, yet something about it stirred a faint flicker of recognition, a pull from a forgotten past. Still, with no hesitation, Suho stepped forward, ready to confront his fate and whatever waited for him beyond the veil of shadows. That wraps up the entire solo leveling story, and with it, the series comes to an end. Thank you for following the journey so far. I hope you enjoyed every moment of it. But this is just the beginning of something new. Up next, we step into the next era as I bring you the story of Jinwoo's son in the timeline of solo leveling Ragnarok. So stay tuned, hit that subscribe button, and turn on notifications so you don't miss it when it drops. I'll see you soon.